All right. Are you guys ready to get started? Type in the chat bar and just let me know if you can hear me and are ready to get rolling. All right, nice. Hey everybody, welcome to week 2 of 5 of the Masterclass. My name is Marty Orfice, and today I'm going to show you how I help my son who was diagnosed with ASD heal and reach his full potential using nutrition and supplementation. Now, full potential is different for everyone. Some people are naturally capable of more. So what this does is it allows everything to get out of the way that's hindering them and help them reach that potential. Now, before we get started, just a quick disclaimer. I am not a doctor and I don't pretend to be one. I am a father that does a ton of research, experiments, and has had absolutely tremendous results. Everything expressed here is my opinion and not medical advice. That said, do your own research prior to implementing anything. All right, now let's do a little bit of housekeeping. We are spending 5 weeks together, and it's going to be on Thursdays for 45 minutes to 1 hour. Now the calls will be recorded and placed in the members area the following day. That said, make being on live a priority. In the members area, which we are updating every single day. We have video recordings, audio of the call so you can listen to when you're out on walks and things like that, or in your car, links to resources and all of the studies that we talk about, as well as product recommendations, all in there. So we're even putting in downloadable resources and spreadsheets and everything else. If you have a question while we're going, just put it into the question bar and I'll stick around at the end and I will get to all of them. I'm going to give you all the information and the steps to take. Then it is up to you. Did everyone do their homework from last week? What did you guys notice? What did you learn? We'll be getting into it at the end, but I want you to think about it. Now, as we move forward over the next few weeks, we're going to be diving really deep into the food and strategies and finding great replacements for the things that you went through and put in your food log. So that homework will be our jumping off point where I'll be able to give you direct feedback and coaching on switching to better options. So today we are going to build on that foundation from last week and dive deep into the nitty-gritty of all the major issues affecting our children and what we can do about it. First thing we need to do is understand the theory of what's happening in the body and in the brain, and then discuss the action steps we need in order to heal our children and candidly ourselves. This started because I was healing myself, and all the same things apply. People are people. Now, our children are just more sensitive, so the changes that we make in their environment, their diet and supplementation are going to have a bigger impact. But if you implement the same things, I guarantee it can change your life for the better. Now, you don't understand exactly how a car works and every little piece of it to drive it, right? You just turn the key and you drive. So don't get bogged down if you stumble with some of the theory and terminology tonight. At the end of the day, as long as you know why you shouldn't dump sand in your gas tank, you'll know enough to implement what I'm going to teach you, okay? And I know it may seem a little bit complex at first, but know that the practical application is extremely simple in how I implement this with my 5-year-old son. And don't worry, I'm going to be showing you that. Simple, not easy. Now, that's a phrase that's used in just about every area of life for decades. Why? Because it's true. Without the understanding of what's happening in our children's body and brains, you won't be able to make decisions on your own and understand the importance of what we're talking about. And there's so much bad information out there. It blows my mind that you need to be equipped with the correct info. And it's much easier to cave in when you don't know the why behind it. So my goal is to make you guys experts so that you can help others in your circles, people that I don't know and I'll never be able to reach. My goal is to spread this message and heal millions of children, and we can do it together if we all understand what's happening in the body. And trust me, you guys are going to be experts, more so than your pediatrician and people who call themselves experts when we're done with this. So what is the gut? Now, there's the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates. He once said that all disease begins in the gut. Now we're centuries later, and it turns out he was right. So when we're talking about the gut, just know that it includes everything from the mouth down to the large intestines. Doctors, scientists, researchers, everybody's starting to realize how powerful the gut truly is. So the way I like to think about it is that if our body is the car, the gut is the engine. And I can't stress the importance of this enough. The gut is the epicenter of all disease, all dysfunction, and not, like I said, it's not just for our kids either. So our gut is loaded with bacteria, and it helps us do things like digest food, regulate our immune system, which experts say it's up to 70% of our immune system is in our gut. It can help control our mood. That's up to 90%. Those feel-good chemicals, serotonin, that's produced in the gut. It regulates our hormones, eliminates toxins, and much, much more. So you can see why when there's dysfunction in our kids' guts or in ours, everything that it can affect. Are you guys seeing how powerful this is? All right. So the first key concept is the microbiome. Now, when you hear the word bacteria, it may frighten you at first. After all, we're groomed growing up to view bacteria as a bad thing. We want to avoid it like the plague. I mean, we buy the cleaning products that are specifically designed to get rid of bacteria. We use what's it called, Purell, put it on our hands so we don't have bacteria on our hands. And while you definitely don't want to stop cleaning off your counters and toilet bowls, the gut bacteria is actually a really good thing. So out of the 100 trillion bacteria inside us, there are literally hundreds of different species, each one playing a different role. And the bacteria, that whole ecosystem, is commonly referred to as the microbiome. So it's all those bacteria, all the different strains, all together. We just call that the microbiome. That's a word we're going to be using throughout the rest of this training. And it's that microbiome that keeps our children strong, healthy, and affects just about every other system in the body. Now, why even care about the gut? Now, I can really get down in the weeds here with study after study and research paper, but for the sake of simplicity and time, I'm just going to highlight the findings of the latest research, but not get into the actual details of each study. If you want to dive deeper into the medical literature, which I can't tell you how many hours that I've been in that, posted links into the members area where you can dive in and start researching it yourself. So the gut impacts digestion and what nutrients we take from food, the immunity, our mental mood and mental health, our weight and our weight point, like our set point and what our normal weight is, inflammation, brain development, sociability, all that type of stuff. And it's interesting because research shows that children with autism have issues with their gut. They have abnormal colonies of digestive bacteria in their intestines. They have more bad bacteria than good. They have less diversity. And they have another issue, which is called leaky gut, which I'll get to in a little bit. But around 70% of the people that they've tested with autism also have gastrointestinal problems. And this is just another interesting aside, but autism is often diagnosed at the same time that our gut flora becomes established, indicating there's even a deeper connection between autism and gut flora. So next key concept is the gut-brain axis. And this is a major, major discovery that happened recently. And it's simply this, that your intestines and brain talk to each other via the endocrine system. So hormones are released into the bloodstream and the nervous system, which nerve signals triggered in the gut are transmitted to the brain and vice versa. So they are talking. Now, researchers only discovered it recently, but it is the hottest topic in medicine right now because changes in the gut directly impact what happens in the brain and other systems in the body. So in autism, our children's gut issues cause brain issues. Isn't that exciting? I mean, not that it causes issues, but it's exciting because it directs us on what we can do to help our children feel better. Powerful stuff. Now, don't lose your mind. Just this image just goes into a little bit more detail of how the gut microbiome affects all the systems in the body. Like I said, just don't get overwhelmed here on the slide. The main objective here for you is to internalize what's happening in the gut affects everything in the body. So if you take a look at it, that middle line, that's the stomach lining, and everything below it, that's the microbiome, okay? And then everything above it, those are all the systems in the body that then communicate with the brain. So you have the endocrine system, the immune system, neurochemical, neural, and metabolic. So everything is coming from the gut is coming and talking to the brain. And as we discussed in autism, gut dysfunction is typical, very typical. So So let's move on to the two biggest issues with our children's guts, which is one is that imbalance of good and bad bacteria, and everybody's favorite area of dysfunction, leaky gut. Now we'll get into what causes both of these a little bit later, but just know that the majority of our kids have leaky gut. And I'll go as far as to say as the majority of the people in our country that eat our Western diet have leaky gut. Now, a healthy gut works like a cheesecloth. And we have it pictured here, but it allows nutrients through, but it keeps the larger food particles and pathogenic bacteria, yeast, and parasites out of the bloodstream. So it's a protection that allows good stuff out, but blocks the bad stuff. So here's a great diagram showing the difference between a healthy gut and a leaky gut. In a leaky gut, the tight junctions of cells that line your small intestines, and that's where most of your digestion takes place, loosen, and it allows undigested food particles and pathogens to get into the bloodstream. And what that does is it activates the immune system, and it causes inflammation and food sensitivities. And I realize this is getting pretty deep into the science, but trust me, we're going to get very, very practical very soon. But in order to understand, you need to understand why things happen so that we can make better decisions. So what happens is your body sees food particles that get through the gut lining as invaders. So it attacks them the same way that it does a virus or a bacterial infection. Can you see how that could be a problem? You know what that does? It leads to inflammation. It leads to compromised immunity. Your body is spending all its time and it's fighting threats from just the food that we eat and doesn't have the capacity to fight off the real threats and help their body heal, which also leads to not getting enough nutrients from food, which is very common in autism as well, nutrient deficiencies. So let's take a look at a quick example, which I think everyone can relate to, which is in the case of eating pizza, which has both gluten, which is a wheat protein, and casein, a milk protein, both of which are problematic in the gut, okay? The particles cross undigested into the body, and then they cross into the brain. What they do is they cause systemic inflammation and get converted. This is like absolutely mind-blowing. They get converted into opiates, and they bind to the same receptors as morphine and heroin. Absolutely mind-blowing, which leads to addiction, inflammation, brain fog, and a number of other issues. And if you've never experienced what this feels like, I challenge you to just get off of gluten for 2 to 4 weeks and then eat a pizza. I think as a culture, we're completely numb to the effects because we don't know any different. At least I wasn't. And I had this constant brain fog. And when I got off, I was like, wow, I can see the world. I can see things. And I didn't have that fogginess over my brain. So if we look at it, eating something like pizza has the same chemical reaction as it's like getting high on drugs, which explains why removing these items can be removing, just like removing drugs from an addict, right? So, and how many of you immediately, when I said that, just started saying in your head, but I love pizza, I just can't give it up? I get it, because I always used to do the same thing when I heard this. That's your addiction talking. And we're going to talk about ways to change the biology so you won't have those cravings as much. But once we heal leaky gut, we can begin to heal that chronic inflammation and take the pressure off our children's brains so that they can heal and start developing again. You getting this? All right, good. All right. Now, we've been talking about the word inflammation quite a bit up to this point. So let's take a quick look at what inflammation is. Now, there's two types. There's acute, and this is when, in the picture here, there's a broken wrist or some sort of injury. And that's good because what happens is the area gets inflamed, and that's your body going into healing mode, right? But chronic inflammation is different. This is what underlies all disease and suppressed immunity. And the fact is that our children's gut issues lead to this chronic inflammation, which affects their ability to grow. It affects their ability to learn, develop, socialize, all of it. And if you take a look at the Time magazine cover, this is not a science that's in the shadows anymore. this is becoming mainstream, and we can capitalize on the latest science and developments to help our children heal. So how does this relate to autism? Okay, well, let's take a quick look at a study published last year. Researchers, what they did is they induced rats to have this systemic inflammation. And it's the same type of inflammation that happens with poor diet and a compromised gut. And then they measured what happened in their brains and behavior. And it's incredible. So what happened was, first thing, there was significant cell death in the cortex and hippocampus in the brain. So brain cells died. 2, they had reduced brain cell formation. So brain cells weren't growing anymore. Next, a hormone called oxytocin was significantly downregulated. Now what this is, don't get too caught up in the name, but oxytocin is that hormone that helps us feel love and social connection. When you hold a baby, you're first in love, you're just flooded with that feel-good chemical. And in autism, that is typically low, okay? And when there's inflammation, it lowers it even more. So there's gene alterations that are similar to what we see in ASD. There's increased sensitivities, so sound, things like that, repetitive behaviors, deficits in memory, social memory and social activities, sleep issues, and even abnormal locomotion. So, movement is a little bit awkward. And all of these alterations were more evident in male than in female rats. Sound familiar? All of these things were caused by inflammation. So one of our main jobs is to reduce the inflammation and get our kids out of that constant fight mode and back into healing and growing. Is this making sense? All right, good. So based on all that information, we hypothesized that if we improve the gut, we reduce inflammation, we improve the symptoms of autism and help our children heal. And there are tons of studies proving this hypothesis. We are going to jump into 2 quick ones that show this. One was done at Arizona State University. Now, in the past, the ASU research has shown that there's ties between autism symptoms and the composition and diversity of a person's gut microbiome we talked about earlier. So what they decided to do was fecal transplants. So they underwent a 10-week program where they had daily fecal transplants. And the treatment program showed long-term benefits. They had an average of 80% improvement of GI symptoms associated with autism spectrum disorders and a 25% improvement in autism behaviors, including improved social skills and better sleep habits. And I know what you're thinking, fecal transplants, what the hell are you talking about? That's absolutely crazy. I get it. I thought the same thing. But what it does is it proves the point. If you heal the gut, you heal the symptoms of autism. And the next study was on the role of probiotics taking orally. Now, in the study, what they did is they fed mice a bacteria strain called Lactobacillus reuteri, and they fed it to mice with autism-like behaviors, and it showed to improve their sociability while increasing the number of oxytocin-producing neurons. So we talked about oxytocin is that thing that wants us, helps us connect with other people and feel that connection, looking people in the eyes, feeling that love. So just changing one bacteria strain in the gut improved sociability. Absolutely incredible. You improve the gut, you improve autism. So let's do a quick recap. Things have gotten a little bit spicy in terms of the science, and we've learned quite a bit, I think, so far. So let's just do a quick recap. First thing is now we know what the microbiome is and why it's important. We learned about the intestinal wall and leaky gut. We learned about chronic inflammation. And we learned about studies that prove that changing the gut changes the brain and can improve symptoms in autism. So now let's just dive into how the gut got messed up in the first place, what affects it now, and the things that we can do to heal it and reduce inflammation. We have to go a little bit forward. So how did it happen? Factors that affect the microbiome. First thing and most important is diet. That's things like dairy, processed food, grains, legumes, sugar, fast food, trans and damaged fats. Antibiotics. When you take an antibiotic, it kills your gut bacteria, and that doesn't matter if you took it during pregnancy or when the child was little. You're basically wiping out that microbiome. You also have pesticides, things like glyphosate, GMOs. Those are common words that we'll get into the definition in a little bit. Artificial sweeteners, those kill the gut. Chronic stress. For kids with autism, they are in that fight or flight, that stress mode quite a bit. If the sensory, if the stimulation is overwhelming for them. So that's where that chronic stress comes in. Medications like, Advil, ibuprofen, things like that, antacids. And then infections, there's yeast overgrowth, bacteria overgrowth, intestinal viruses, parasitic infections, things like that. And then one that most people don't think about was just how was the child delivered. If it was delivered via a C-section, then they don't get your full microbiome. And that's where babies get it. They get the bacteria that's on your skin, but not what's in your gut. So, starting from day one, they have compromised immunity. So in order to heal the gut and reduce inflammation, I've created what I call the 2R protocol. And the first thing that we do, the first R, is to remove. And the goal here is to take out dietary irritants. And the second is repair. And that's just to add in food and supplements that help the gut heal. So let's jump right in to the things that we need to remove, okay? All right, I know what you're thinking. Wheat, oh my God, I love it. But wheat is one of the worst offenders, and not just because of the buzzwords that you hear like gluten. It is the who's who of anti-nutrients. So I'm just going to walk through a few of the things that are in it. There's another chemical in there called agglutinin. I can't even pronounce it, but it is also inflammatory. Gluten, what that does is it helps the gut cells release a protein that breaks the tight junctions in our gut apart. So basically, gluten causes leaky gut. There's a sugar that feed bad gut bacteria. There's things that provoke allergies. There's phytic acid, which sucks nutrients out of the body. There's things called lectins, which damage the gut lining wall. And this is crazy, but they started doing this recently. They are covered in pesticides. Farmers spray Roundup on their crop just before the harvest to kill them. It gives them like a 10% increased yield. So even if the wheat isn't genetically modified, you're getting a wheat that's full of pesticide. Can you see why you wouldn't want this to be a staple of your child's diet? Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is sugar, everyone's favorite. All right, so I'm just going to walk through a few of the things here. In the gut, sugar feeds bad gut bacteria, yeast, and other pathogens. So the bad guys in here, this is why you have those cravings. Yeast and the bad gut bacteria, they need to get fed. So that's why you have cravings. So when you start to balance out that gut, guess what goes away? Cravings. So with a kid who just only eats a certain thing and that's all they want because of the cravings, as you start to balance that out, the cravings start to go away, which makes life much easier, okay? Also, inflammation. Chronically high blood sugar levels has been linked to inflammation in the brain. We just went over what it does in the brain when you have high levels of inflammation. No bueno. Learning and memory. In 2012, there was a study at UCLA which found that diets high in fructose, which is just another word for sugar, hinders learning and memory by literally slowing down the brain. Want your child to do worse at school? Give them candy. Simple as that. Slows down the brain. And they found another study, they did rats that overconsume fructose had damaged synaptic activity. So I know it sounds crazy, but just it means that communication among the brain cells were impaired, okay? Mood. So sugar contributes to symptoms of depression. And how it does this is it messes with the neurotransmitters and basically overworks them to where they diminish the supply of serotonin. And they mess with the pathways. So cognitive flexibility, I think you guys can understand this one, which is basically the ability to switch between concepts. In one study, mice were fed a high sugar diet, and it showed to reduce their cognitive flexibility, just all due to changes in the microbiome. So if you want your children to be inflexible, feed them more sugar. Now, sugar is in almost every food and in every package, so it's really difficult to eliminate altogether. So the goal here is to reduce it as much as possible. Now, next week, I'm going to show you how you can find those hidden sources of sugar in our food and the best ways to get that sweet taste without damaging the body and brains of our kids. And just a quick example of how this can affect, especially when you're off of it. Tiffany, a girl I work with, she has been on the 2-hour protocol, her entire family, since the beginning of the year. And her son been doing phenomenal and, improving behavior, all this, doing really, really well. And, grandparents, they took him to a birthday party and, as grandparents do, oh, have whatever you want, have the cookies, the cake, and everything else. And he did. And what happened was on Monday, tons of gastrointestinal issues, just a maniac. Couldn't go back to daycare for 3 days. They kicked him out first day. Had to go pick him up and was out of work for 3 days. It's crazy. If you guys want to learn more about how sugar affects the body, there's a movie, I believe it's on Netflix, but it's called Fed Up. Really, really eye-opening in how that affects the body. So I would take a look at that. All right, just going to get a drink of water here. All right, next, dairy. Now, we all grew up with this idea that milk's a health food and naturally reluctant to take it out of our children's diets. Now, I remember initially I was really worried about my son not getting enough nutrients if we removed dairy from his diet. But after doing a ton of research, the choice was obvious. And there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, it's really hard to digest. Mammals haven't evolved to drink milk past weaning. So past the page of 1, most people don't make enough lactose, which is just the enzyme that helps digest milk sugar. 2, it causes inflammation. 3, it makes mucus thicker and harder to drain, which leads to things like sinus and ear infections. And casein, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which is that milk protein, turns into opiates in the brain, functions like morphine, and causes severe neurological problems. Also, dairy is pumped with hormones and antibiotics, and that's just done to increase production. But don't worry, the company that makes these hormones, Monsanto, they say it's perfectly safe, so we take them at our word for it. Now, also, it's clinically proven to increase diabetes risk, which there's over 90 clinical studies that show the more dairy you consume, higher risk of diabetes. And because millions of dollars in advertising and celebrities wearing the sexy milk mustaches, like I totally get why parents think it's their duty to feed their children as much cow's milk as possible. But the bottom line is that dairy is harmful to our children and should be eliminated from their diet. And candidly, yours too. You cannot be a healthy, functioning adult thinking that you can, be consuming large amounts of milk. It just doesn't work. Now, we'll be getting into milk alternatives next week as we explore food choices and alternatives and things like that. But for now, just know, no bueno. And there's one caveat to this, which I want to mention now. We'll be getting into it, throughout the course. But grass-fed butter is okay. And the reason why is that it has very little milk sugar and milk protein in it. All right, the last part of the remove protocol, pesticides. Now, bottom line, pesticides are designed to kill, and it's probably best to stay away from them. That's their job. They are designed to kill. Now, you've probably heard terms like organic and GMO. So first, let's just dive in quick and understand what those words mean. GMO, hot buzzword now, it stands for genetically modified organism. And they are simply food that was designed not to die when they are sprayed with poison. Okay, and the main poison that's sprayed on everything is a chemical called Roundup and the active ingredient glyphosate. You're going to hear that word quite a bit. We talk about it. We talked about it last week. And now they can be modified in other ways as well, but primarily when you're talking about GMOs, it's a crop that's designed not to die when you spray it with poison. Now, organic means that it's free of toxic pesticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers, sewage sludge. Yeah, they use sewage sludge as fertilizer, artificial hormones, antibiotics, and GMOs. So when you select organic, you're not getting GMOs and you're removing the sewage sludge and all the other stuff from it. So it's a really good thing. So why is it so bad? Now, Monsanto, the company that creates the majority of the pesticides, says it's awesome and it won't hurt you at all. There's others that disagree. The World Health Organization classified glyphosate as carcinogenic to humans. The state of California did as well. They also found that glyphosate causes mutations in DNA. It increases oxidative stress. Which that does is it just triggers inflammation and speeds up aging. Fun. Glyphosate causes gut permeability, which we talked about earlier, and its Roundup is directly toxic to mitochondria. And what that is that's the cellular energy. So the more energy our cells have and our kids' cells have, they can fight off things and get into growth mode. But if we continue to poison them with pesticides, then they don't have the cellular energy to do what they need to do to grow. And there are a ton of other issues with this. I'm not going to go that deep into it. Just know that it affects our children's bodies a ton. It affects our bodies. It's really bad stuff. We're not going to be able to get rid of glyphosate and all these pesticides completely. Why? Because it's water soluble. So it's in our groundwater, it's in our rain. I mean, it's everywhere. So there's some supplements that we can take to help minimize some of the damage, but it's been shown that organic food, because it can't be sprayed on it, and people that eat the organic diet have significantly lower levels of glyphosate residue in their system, okay? So more than 70% of the processed food in your local supermarket contain genetically modified ingredients and pesticides. That percentage is probably a little bit low just because there's no labels that are required to inform consumers about the presence of GMOs. But anyway, pesticides, no bueno. All right, wow, that's a lot to take in. And before we move on to repair, how many of you guys were thinking, what is left to eat? I understand. I thought the same thing too. And my son had problems with change, problem with textures, would routinely throw his plate against the wall. So I get it. And that's why I had to come up with strategies and a system that worked. And before we get too off track, know that I'll be going over everything next week. Meal plans, typical day, how to start, behavior hacks, everything. But let's get back on track and finish up with step 2 of our 2R protocol, which is repair. Now, repair falls into 2 main categories: food and supplements. And the first and most important thing that we can do is change the food that we eat. So in addition to removing food that causes issues, we're going to be switching to eating foods that are higher in fat and lower in sugar. Now, our eating plan is focused on healing the gut and reducing inflammation, and most closely resembles paleo, if you've ever heard that term. So if you're looking up recipes on Pinterest, you can type in paleo, and that's typically going to be falling in line with things that won't cause inflammation in our children's bodies. Now, it's interesting. In the 60s, the sugar lobby paid scientists at Harvard to say that fat caused heart disease. And just like that, that whole low-fat craze was born. And unfortunately for us and the world, it has made us collectively fatter, sicker, and dumber because of the effects that sugar has on our brain. And now it's in almost every food that we have. But that's the coolest part about this, because we get to add in things that are good for the brain, like healthy fats. And those are things that fill us up and give us better and cleaner energy and help our brain develop. So my son eats avocado, bacon all the time. He absolutely loves it. So what this means is that we're eating more whole, unprocessed foods. So think about walking on the outside of the grocery store. There are snacks that come in a wrapper. Anything that's in that middle, probably things that we're looking to avoid. Now, that said, there are some good alternatives we're going to be going into, but for the most part, when I go to the store, it's just immediately, it's all the way around the outside. all right, we're going to be eating fiber and prebiotics. And basically what that is it's carbohydrates that support the growth of good gut bacteria. Things like sweet potatoes, butternut squash, carrots, asparagus. And we have probiotics, which they fall under two categories. It's both food and supplements. And all probiotics and the entire conversation of probiotics is about reintroducing good bacteria either through food or supplements. And you can do that by eating naturally occurring probiotics and kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha, things like that. With my son, I found it difficult to sell sauerkraut. So mixing in a probiotic into his green juice or giving him a chewable each morning is a super simple way to do it. Not having to say, hey, you need to eat sauerkraut, because most kids just don't really enjoy that. And I always get the same question after I say that is, should I eat yogurt? Now, probiotic or products and probiotics in yogurt, best to stay away because they mostly have sugar, artificial sweeteners if they don't have the sugar. In addition, they're dairy and soy-based, which both cause issues. So we want to increase our child's fat intake. And I'm not saying eat more trans fat or fat from sick or diseased animals. I'm talking about healthy fats. So why is fat so good for our children's brains? Without getting too technical, it helps our children's brains improve faster processing, improve self-control, emotional control, learning and memory. It's the fuel that our brain needs and our children's brains needs to perform at an optimal level and heal. So a few examples of this: avocado, coconut oil, grass-fed butter. We'll go into it next week, but Kerrygold brand. It's in every supermarket across the nation. And if you're really dorky, the reason why the grass-fed butter is so good is it contains something called butyrate, which reduces inflammation and helps with leaky gut. And that's why I put it in my coffee every morning. Shoot me a quick note if you want to learn about that. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at supplements. We've already discussed food. Now, supplements are critical for our children to achieve optimal health. Now, autism, dysfunction in the gut, and nutrient deficiencies are really common, so we need to give our children supplements in order to help their bodies and brains get out of that survival mode and into the thriving mode. And since we've already talked about probiotics, let's jump into digestive enzymes. What these are just enzymes that our body produces naturally, and we're just giving a little bit more. And they help break down the food that we eat, especially when we're eating those really tough to digest foods. And there's study after study where if you just give your kid digestive enzymes before every meal, symptoms improve. Why? Because you're not having the inflammation that's caused by undigested food crossing into the blood and into the brain. The next one is omega-3 fatty acids. And these are fish oil, things like that, that reduce inflammation. And they're naturally occurring in some fish and also through supplementation. My son takes a fish oil supplement that tastes like lemonade, loves it. L-glutamine, this is an anti-inflammatory amino acid that fixes leaky gut. It covers the cell walls and gets rid of the unwanted pests, the bad bacteria. Then we have collagen protein, and now you can either get this in a supplement form or in bone broth, and this is tremendous to help heal the gut. There's also a supplement called Restore, which is new. And what this does is it helps decrease gut permeability. So it gets those tight junctions back in line and helps improve the gut balance. Now, I realize that this seems like a lot to take in at first, and the point isn't to overwhelm you or, even to say, hey, you have to do everything tomorrow, right? This is about making true sustainable life changes, not about changing everything overnight. That's what I see most of the time, in January when everyone's like, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to get super healthy. And a week later, they just fizzle out and they're done. This is about making sustainable life changes. So when you look at it, don't get overwhelmed. We can take this one step at a time. And the goal of everything is to just be as simple to implement as possible. Now, next week, I'm going to be diving into the foods that your children should be eating, sample meals, exactly which supplements to take and then when. It's basically the entire playbook to implement the 2R protocol that we went over today. And while I do plan to get into food specifics next week, I think it'd be really helpful to see an example of a typical breakfast. Wouldn't that be great? Okay, cool, let's do it. So let's think about our homework from last week and walk through a typical breakfast scenario. Orange juice, toast, cereal, milk. I mean, really, really standard kids' breakfast. And the typical breakfast, unfortunately, is that glyphosate cocktail. Spikes blood sugar, causes inflammation, it feeds the bad gut bacteria, it causes leaky gut, and causes that crash a few hours later, feeling sad, and then increased appetite for more. But then over the years, we've evolved, right? We've heard about the healthy breakfast. We're going to have oatmeal. We're going to have that whole grain bagel, the bowl of fruit, the glass of skim milk, so we don't have too much fat. And the reality is, this is just as bad and causes all the same issues as the typical diet. But that's what we're led to believe is healthy. It's not. So our R2 breakfast, which is a little bit different, is eggs, avocado, uncured pastured bacon, and R2 pancakes, which is a pancake recipe that I developed that's made out of banana, eggs, and some protein powder that tastes amazing. I use them all the time for snacks and everything else. I believe that recipe is also in the members area. Super simple to make. I can do it on a school morning with limited time. So a great one to have. So what does the R2 breakfast do? Well, it feeds the brain. We have that good fat that's going and we're using as fuel. It keeps us full longer and without any crashes. We're feeding good gut bacteria. Are you guys seeing how powerful this is? These slight changes just in something as simple as breakfast. Another slide from last week. Change isn't easy, guys, especially for our kids. And you can't ask your kid to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. Just can't do it. And this won't work if you're not committed. So when things aren't easy, you can always lean on that commitment to your child. You need to be willing to say no in order to say yes to their future. I just love that. We have to be willing as parents to say no in order to say yes to their future. And like I said before, this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Results take time. This is a lifestyle shift. So let's all take one small commitment together right now and talk about next week's homework. So I realize that this can be overwhelming. I said it before. What I want you to do, though, is just pick one thing to remove. We talked about the 2R protocol, remove and repair. So let's take one thing to remove and one thing to help repair. And for those of you on, type in the chat box what you are going to implement. For remove, it could be the wheat, it could be the dairy, it could be the sugar, or it could be the pesticides, which means buying organic meat, fruit, vegetables, and staying out of the processed food section. For repair, it could be adding in more healthy fat or buying a supplement. And my current recommendations for the supplements, they're linked in the members area. So if you just say, well, I want to, get them on a probiotic or the fish oil, I've heard that's good. And you just, there's a link in there, take it to Amazon or wherever where you can pick it up. So what happens next? Well, next week is going to get 100% practical. Like I said, this is the playbook to implement the 2R protocol. We're going to go over things that are behavioral, how I handle things like, throwing the plate against the wall and food refusal. How I handled, I don't like it, I won't eat it. The exact supplement list and the brands and the timing. Quick strategies to get them to try anything that you put on the plate. And we talked about a little bit earlier, but killing those cravings biologically. So making those cravings go away by balancing out the gut. Walking through a typical day like we did with the breakfast, strategies to change the food and behavior, how to deal with schools, nannies, churches, vacations, friends' houses, birthday parties, all that stuff. how do you get family buy-in? That was a tough thing for me at first because, everyone is used to a certain way of eating or being, and you start to change that and people get a little bit crazy. And then one of the most important things, which is shopping. Food companies, they are out to trick us using buzzwords and things like that. So we're going to go over what to buy, how to read labels, everything else. Everyone's like, oh, gluten-free, gluten-free. You'll find out why most gluten-free food is way worse for your children than non-gluten-free food. And I saw a really funny meme the other day. It was like, cocaine is gluten-free. Heroin is gluten-free. There's a lot of things that are gluten-free. Water, gluten-free. Doesn't mean it's healthy, right? And as I said, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we're going to just take one thing that you want to change, one thing from repair or remove, and one thing from repair, and then we can build on that.